let's leave the questions to the end. I don't know if there are questions from someone right now. Okay, so thank you again, Flip, and now we continue with Rosemary Lee. Lee is an artist and media studies researcher, and her works focus on the epistemic grounding of visual media and the history of visual technologies. Lee completed her PhD at the IT University of Copenhagen in 2020 with a thesis entitled Machine Learning and the Notions of the Image. And today we have the pleasure, she will discuss how the co-option of scientific imaging techniques and the apparatus in artistic practices may contribute to new forms of visual knowledge production by looking at data-intensive approaches to image making. This presentation considers how various forms of visualization relate to the existing ideas of objectivity in images. So let's welcome Rosemary. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm not sure. Okay. Okay, so thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Adriana, for having me here. It's very, very nice to participate. So, as André said, I'm an artist and media studies researcher. The past 3 years, my work has centered on the influence of algorithmic processes in image production and how this connects to the history of visual technologies. I've been specifically looking at how the incorporation of machine learning into artistic practice shapes the way that we think about images. And I've recently released a video with Miguel Carvalhais entitled Myth, Magic, Machines, reflecting on the mythology surrounding artificial intelligence. So this extends from my PhD research, in which I looked at how the discourse on machine learning in contemporary art is informed by longer historical narratives surrounding technological forms of image production. And I've subsequently been writing a book adapting that work into a more accessible form with the working title Algorithm, Image, Art. So one of the core arguments of my recent research is that while machine learning is a relatively new paradigm of image making, it touches on a number of issues that have been explored at length in the history of art and in theories of the image. For example, questions concerning the value, authorship, meaning, and truthfulness of images have become intimately connected with technological processes, especially since the widespread use of photographic and later digital media. I've been looking at parallels between aspects of machine learning and much older forms of image making, such as analog approaches where images are formulated in terms of highly structured procedures and constraining proportional relationships within visual compositions. I'm also interested in cases where unified images or simulations are produced from combining or analyzing aspects of multiple images or visual data in a composite form. So this connects to longer threads in my work, which is deeply informed by the approach of media archaeology. Media archaeology seeks to better understand contemporary media artifacts and contexts in relation to longer historical tendencies that shape them. It often looks at earlier precursor technologies to those of today in order to gain a better understanding of how current methods, devices, or perspectives are related to those of the past. So for example, we may look at pre-cinematic devices in relation to film or digital media. Adopting what Siegfried Zielinski calls a deep time perspective of media allows us to draw insights from artifacts from the distant past, in contrast to the common tendency to exclusively consider technology in terms of the new. So I've been quite influenced by post-phenomenology's understanding of the feedback loop between how we see and the design of technologies that in turn augment visual perception. For example, photographic and painterly aesthetics remain influential in art working with machine learning, in spite of the fact that very different processes go on behind the visual surface of an image. Algorithms structure visual media not only aesthetically but processually, and also how we understand and interpret it. So many artists and theorists have discussed this interpretive aspect of algorithmic media, or rendering images invisible or non-visual or invisual, to use UC Parika's term. Haroon Farouki notably describes images as operative, saying, "These are images that do not represent an object, but rather are part of an operation." Trevor Paglen has used the term invisible image to describe similar phenomena. And I've been exploring these ideas in terms of an ecological conception of sensory perception. So following Jacob von Uexküll's theory of Umwelt, according to this theory, an organism's perceptual apparatus are understood as having a circular relationship with the perceivable world through an organ of perception and the organism's contingent ability to act upon the sensory information it takes in. To summarize, it's quite a complicated theory, but what this means is that an organism is only able to respond to phenomena in its surroundings in its capacity to perceive those phenomena, leading to perception being finely attuned to the signifiers that are most relevant to an animal's survival. So I've been exploring this in relation to the history of cybernetics in terms of a technological conception of the Umwelt. And in this sense, the Umwelt, the world as it is experienced by an organism, comes to be a technological Umwelt, the world as it is encountered through technology. The technological Umwelt is the perceptual world of an agent as determined by its perceptual apparatus, but inclusive of forms of technical mediation. So in this theoretical understanding, I expand organism to agent, acknowledging the abilities, agency, and influence of non-living perceptual actors, as found in instances of technologically mediated enhanced or expanded perception. So I've explored this in relation to adversarial approaches in machine learning. And in adversarial approaches, inputs are designed to effectively attack a machine learning system. And these have been of particular interest to artists for their potential to reveal discrepancies between human vision and the performance of visual processing tasks entailed in machine vision or computer vision. These kind of approaches often aim to trigger errors in machine learning systems while remaining intelligible to human visual perception. And this, one reason for this is that it makes their results more easily verifiable, which is something that is relevant to something I'll introduce later. So this can be seen in projects such as CV Dazzle by Adam Harvey, in which he created a lookbook of suggested styling tips in order to hide one's face from facial recognition systems. But perhaps what is more consequential even than the overlaps, gaps, or inconsistencies between human vision and machine interpretation of the visual, we might consider how this relates to conceptions of visual knowledge and understanding. In this regard, I've been looking at Johanna Drucker's work on visual epistemology and interpretive digital tools. Through her work, I've been examining whether and how we may think of imaging and the process of visualization through data as a form of knowledge production. And I've been looking at this in terms of how the aesthetic, conceptual, and methodological approach applied in an image-making practice may in turn inform the way our images should be interpreted or can be interpreted. So, for example, Drucker contrasts these two images. The one on the left was made in 1669, and it's a conceptual map by Athanasius Kircher, interpreting Raymond Lull's Great Art of Knowing, which is a bit of an esoteric practice through image, this image. But what Johanna Drucker says about this image is that it produces the knowledge that it draws. So by kind of applying this conceptual map, you actually produce some form of knowledge through it. And she argues that the other image on the right only displays information, making it the more fixed of the two images. And this image is from the Opti Project's 2003 map of internet traffic, which, and I think thinking of this as a very static image kind of goes against some of our assumptions that digital media is inherently more dynamic than analog media. But although it's visually stable, Kircher's drawing has more openness to change than the digital one against which it's compared, because it lends itself more to the variability of execution in the mental images that are conjured from it. While the more recently produced image of the internet is actually less open to variable readings, as it doesn't require the viewer to play as active role in its interpretation. So I think this offers some insight into the dynamic qualities of visual media, irrespective of the medium of execution. But while such openness to variability may not be exclusive to a particular medium or method, digital media may facilitate or emphasize these modalities more so than others. The ephemerality of digital images is especially visible in networked contexts, where they're often hyper-reactive and subject to the flux of algorithms or streams of data coursing through the various platforms we access them through. These qualities may, at least superficially, give the impression that digital images are distinct from the materiality of their more analog counterparts, such as drawings, paintings, and printed photographs. But in spite of their tendency towards the immaterial, digital artifacts are structured by not only those material constraints, but also conceptual constraints of the infrastructures entailed in their display, storage, and transmission. So connecting this to advanced visual technologies, new data-intensive forms of visualization allow the production of outputs that are connected to real-world phenomena in highly mediated ways. And I think this really connects to the first presentation in an interesting way, that we're able to visualize phenomena that would be otherwise quite intangible or incomprehensible to us. And one example that I quite like for this is the images that have been produced of black holes using the Event Horizon Telescope. And aside from the fact that these are the first somewhat direct visualizations that we have of black holes, I think they're quite interesting because they don't have visual referentiality that we can't, nobody has seen a black hole, and it's impossible to see a black hole with the naked eye. So we actually don't have this visual reference to refer to and measure the accuracy of these images against, which tends to be like the optical and photographic paradigm of image making. So another good example of this is forensic architecture's work with cloud phenomena in their work, cloud studies. And in artistic practice, there's many, many examples of this, especially with many artists working with Dali recently. But I quite like Hito Styles' use of, or co-option of, data-intensive forms of visualization in social sim, where she uses, she interprets statistics about police brutality into these threads that cause simulated police bodies to dance in a very unusual way. So she finds a way of working with data in a sense that is like not intended to be objective at all. So in such a way, data-driven methods are able to reconceptualize the empirical value of images, undermining expectations of its objectivity as a visual record. So I've been looking at this in terms of Daston and Gallison's book, Objectivity, where they outline 3 primary forms of visual objectivity. The first of these is visual resemblance, which is, I would argue, is maybe our primary way that we intuitively like to measure objectivity. And this refers to the verisimilitude or quality of appearing true to life in terms of visual referentiality. The second form of objectivity that they describe is through technical process. So for example, direct technical mediation, such as through photography or microscopy, in the terms of these images of snowflakes. And finally, trained judgment, where the image does not aspire to visual realism, but rather involves forms of visual notation that must be interpreted in very particular way. So I'm quite interested in how data-intensive methods of visualization can be seen as exploring ways of knowing about the world that are detached from direct sensorial perception. And as a result, digital aesthetics often defy easy categorization, following these existing conceptions of visual objectivity. Matthew Fuller and A.L. Weissman describe this as an aesthetics beyond perception, meaning that the process applied to interpret data into visual form has a great deal of influence on the process, on the end result that comes out. And I think this is relevant to the issues of this panel, as it inquires into the idea of the media artifact as interchangeable with data, which I think is kind of a common tendency in this realm. And in many ways, we're actually able to, at least in practice, treat images as translatable, or like data as translatable across a variety of media. But this emphasis on data often requires critical assessment, as it's built on the back of presumptions about the supposed neutrality, objectivity, and realism of data-based approaches, which I believe are not, well, they're quite unresolved, and I think we often take some of these ideas about data and truth as givens, even though they're very much not, and they're very non-neutral. So to conclude, I feel like I'm kind of just giving an overview of where I am currently in my explorations with these topics, and I don't feel like I have any direct outcomes to really summarize. It's much more like I see some of these things as open connections to still be built upon and explored. But I'm quite interested in connections between each of these threads that I've brought in. So this post-phenomenological perspective of media, And then this history of, data-based approaches to visualization. And this definitely comes back to the history of photography, which itself also started out as a highly techno-scientific way of producing images, but now it's been extremely normalized and naturalized, and especially when we adopt these kind of approaches in artistic practice, we really subvert the intention for technical and scientific image making to present a truthful visualization. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to maybe digging further into these ideas in the discussion.
Thank you, Rosemary, for a beautiful presentation. And it's fascinating to find these relatable similarities as you've introduced with the previous presentation about turbulence, and it was a beautiful and inspiring presentation about new ways to see and try to make the invisible visible through lots of plethora of techniques. So thank you. Okay, so if there are no questions at the moment, we continue with the session.
Oh, I think there is one.
Okay.
I saw.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Rosemary. I think it was a really nice presentation. I was wondering, I think you mentioned this briefly while you were talking, because you talk about the three modes of objectivity of Daston and Gallicen, and in their book they talk of them through history, right? So truth to nature, then in 19th century, mechanical objectivity, then trend judgment in early 20th century. In trend judgment, the idea of, the image doesn't tell the whole truth. You have to have some intuitive training, intuition that comes through training. But I think you only spoke of the last phase, which they kind of speculate about, which is the new paradigm that's coming also with AI, but also quantum physics. That is, to produce the image is to produce the object of knowledge, the object of study. And I think you only mentioned it briefly. I would like to know a little bit more how this last paradigm would relate more with your own questions.
Yeah, I feel like for me that's still, I feel like that's exactly where I'm interested in exploring more. And to be honest, I feel like I haven't quite developed that much in that, on that exact topic. Like I feel like I'm starting to pull some of that together, but I'm still quite new to this like visual epistemology and trying to understand how this ties into these historical perspectives, and in what ways is it genuinely new, and in what ways is it some combination of these other paradigms, or does it borrow from these other paradigms, or does it genuinely produce like a fundamentally new form of creating knowledge through the process? And I'm leaning towards that it is, I think it does present us new ways of understanding the world and of thinking of visualizations as a form of knowledge, because we are creating things that didn't exist before. But yeah, I hope that answers you. But yeah, to be honest, I feel like that's really very much under development, at least in my work.
Yeah, and they are very interesting questions, and I think we have time during the final Q&A to explore a bit the territory. So thank you again, Rosemary.